I like to describe agriculture producers in general as the ever optimists. It's always going to get better. It can always get better. And unfortunately, in some of our areas in Montana here, we're going on year 3 to 4 of a drought, and we still have areas that have not seen appreciable rain or snowfall in that time frame. So still relying on a lot of those harvested forages.
All right, welcome to this episode of the Beef Podcast. My name is Dr. Stephanie Hansen. I'm a feedlot nutritionist here at Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa. And our guest today is Dr. Megan Van Emon from Montana State University. She's been an extension beef cattle specialist since 2014. Her research focuses on supplementation strategies, cow-calf production, drought management, and water quality. Her research and extension programs focus on improving beef cattle production in Montana and throughout the United States. For the past few years, Megan has been focusing on beef cattle drought management in her extension programming. Haven't we all? Meg grew up on a small farm in Northeast Indiana, received her bachelor's and master's in animal science from Purdue, and her PhD in ruminant nutrition at North Dakota State University. Meg was actually a postdoc with us here at Iowa State University before joining the Animal and Range Sciences faculty at Montana State. She's located off campus at the USDA ARS Fort Keogh in Miles City. Welcome, Meg.
All right. Well, thanks for having me.
I was trying to think when the last time we saw each other was, and I think we saw each other in Fort Collins last year, right, for Western Animal Science?
Yes. Yeah. It's been a while.
Yeah, that's a fun meeting. That was the first time we had gone out there, and we took the grad students out and did a little hiking in Estes Park and stuff before the meetings. So,
Ooh, all right.
Yeah. Did you make it out to Utah this year? Park City, right?
No, ended up going to national meetings this year in Oklahoma City. So went down there and presented a few papers.
Gotcha. Right. Yeah. I saw you down there too. Time flies.
Oh, yeah. It was May just last week, in case anybody wondered.
It definitely was May just last week. And it's not that we have snow in the forecast here in November of 2022. So, all right. Well, our purpose with this podcast is to kind of get the latest and greatest in beef research and extension philosophies out there to beef producers across the U.S. Or maybe even internationally with the way the podcast can be available now. So we kind of chatted ahead of time about a few things that we might want to talk about. So I want to ask this question first, though. Go back a few years, several years now, right? You're an associate professor now. When you first came into your position in Montana, what did you think your program was going to focus on?
Oh, goodness. Wow. That's a tough one. You come in and you're all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, ready to get going on programming. And I think I thought, coming from your lab would be, a lot of focus on, the importance of minerals, on cow-calf nutrition, just basically some basic management, and thinking also that I worked a little too hard on some of the basic stuff, but there's always those questions on some basic nutrition information that those producers wanted. So luckily that has kind of helped, I guess, form my extension programming over the last few years to hopefully keep diving a little more in depth on maybe just some basic needs. The last few years too, record keeping has been a big focus as well. Still have a lot of producers that don't keep records of their cattle or who calves, which calf belongs to which cow, even preg checking, in the fall and everything. That's kind of was surprising to me. So been trying to get some more of that basic information out there. So hopefully that keeps going on in the future and we keep improving and keep going.
Yeah, I think that's one of the values of going from a very intensive beef production system like we have here in the Midwest, where I'm located and where you were really kind of raised in the beef industry. And then you're in a much more extensive system out there, right? I always have to explain to students, right? Like they may not even have a tractor because it's really hard to depreciate that tractor over, 1,200 cows when you don't have to do like the corn plowing and stuff like you do here. So it's a very different system when it comes to labor and inputs.
Yeah, it was definitely an eye eye opener coming from out here. Doing my doctorate in North Dakota, I thought I had a pretty good grasp on maybe smaller town, Western United States, but you kind of get out here and realize there's a lot smaller towns than even where I did my work in Hettinger. And you're talking to in a town of maybe 2 to 300 people and everything, but always had really good feedback and really great producers to work with. That's, I think, the big thing is finding those producers that are really willing to be a little more proactive.
Yeah, absolutely. I always love when you go to a meeting and get lots of good questions. That's how you know you've hit the nail on the head, right? Like, ooh, they were interested in that.
Yeah, it took me a while to learn that, having 50, 100 people at a meeting wasn't the most important. It's even just having 5 or 10. And if you get all those questions and you feel you're really engaging that audience, that's where the importance is, because you might have just also engaged in that smaller community, 1,000, 2,000 head of cattle, just because that's how extensive and how large the herds are here.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely those impact players. Okay, so fast forward then a few years, going in bright-eyed and bushy-tailed as we all do into our faculty positions, and then we were kind of talking in our pre-show discussion about the reality that is the beef industry has faced over the last several years now in parts of the country. That is drought with a capital D. So let's talk a little bit about some of the programming efforts that you've worked on there at Montana State around kind of drought management, and maybe starting with what things are you talking to producers about right now as we think about cows being pulled off of pastures, pulled off of range, moving to the home place, and we start to think about them moving into winter, harvested forages, harvested feedstuffs? What are the things that you're telling producers to keep top of mind?
As at least last year, specifically in Montana, and probably a lot of the Western US, has shown, keeping that hay and harvested forage inventory, recommending at least 1 year, hopefully 2 years of that forage held back, just for the reason of the drought, and having to possibly extend that harvested forages feeding. Last year, at least in our area, we started feeding forages in some areas in July, maybe August, and then had to hold those cows all the way over until May. And luckily, this year, at least in 2022, a lot of Montana, it started raining May 15th, and we got some really good rains and had really good pasture growth as well as hay crop. So, luckily, able to kind of come back to that harvested forage growth and, have a better hay crop this year. But noticed after we had a good hay crop in 2019. A lot of that harvested forage got sold. Didn't keep probably as much back as you should, because I like to describe agriculture producers in general as the ever optimists. It's always going to get better. It can always get better. And unfortunately, in some of our areas in Montana here, we're going on year 3 to 4 of a drought, and we still have areas that have not seen appreciable rain or snowfall in that time frame. So still relying on a lot of those harvested forages. So, inventory is probably the big one. Uh, Also, culling management. Where do you start with that selective culling? And I also say everybody's got Bessie out there. She's your favorite cow or the grandkids' favorite cow, and she weighs 1,800 pounds, and she weans a 300-pound calf every year, because Bessie's a body condition score 8 or 9, and probably isn't pulling her weight production wise. But that might be the time to consider. Bessie may need to go down the road, but then
Whoa, whoa,
obviously if she,
whoa!
I
You can't
know.
send Bessie down the road, and I'm feeling a little called out here, Meg.
Yeah, that's the hard part, is how do you call that one favorite cow that everybody's got. But that's been the big one, as well as then, as I know Dr. Junowski is probably going to talk with you about in another episode, nitrate issues. We ran into a lot of that the last couple of years, and how to effectively manage those. Um, because and for some of those producers, that's all they have to feed is higher nitrate feeds. And unfortunately, those rules of thumb we think about with straw, feeding straw or those higher nitrate feeds, we've kind of had to throw those out the window, because that's just what we had available. And fortunately, have only heard a few wrecks come up, but there have been a few, and they've been significant, but luckily it's been pretty minimal. I'm not saying they're not important, but hopefully that feeding management wise that, they managed through it versus not being able to manage through it, and able to keep at least some of those genetics around that they've been, developing over the years.
So let's circle back. I was writing a couple of notes here down, and you said that there might be places where cows started receiving hay in July and didn't see new green grass until May. And as a micronutrient nutritionist, that kind of makes me shiver a little bit, right? And we both know what I'm thinking about. So tell us what your vitamin A issues have maybe looked like there in the last few years.
Yeah, that it's one of those we don't think too much about if you've got that green forage out there, and then the last few years, a lot of 2, 3-year-old hay has been fed, a lot of straw. So, vitamin A, you think green forage. Without green forage, not very much vitamin A. So I think there's been those that have had a really good mineral nutrition program, or at least a good mineral vitamin pack in some of their lick tubs or their K cubes or things like that, that have weathered that storm a little better than some of the other producers that maybe have cut that out, because it is expensive, but it's not something I ever recommend. It's an insurance policy. So these, let's see, last spring, which would be 2021, as well as this spring, because of that extended feeding of those older forages, we ran into some abortion issues with vitamin A deficiency, or just some really sick calves. Those calves that just don't thrive after calving time, and if they happen to die, they have been necropsied. And luckily, I guess it was diagnosed as a vitamin A deficiency, and so at least that's counter. We can counteract that with some vitamin A injectables, and just getting back that vitamin and mineral nutrition program as well.
Yeah, I think let's do a little public service announcement here for those who don't know as much as us about vitamin and mineral nutrition. So, one of the unique things about fat soluble vitamins, so vitamin A and E, D and K, when we think about those, the cow gives very little via the placenta to the calf. So when that calf is born, if he was born stillborn and you send him to the vet for necropsy, they would come back and say there's no fat soluble vitamins in this calf, and they would be correct because the cow didn't give any during gestation, right? But if that calf did get to nurse, got colostrum, things like that, and then you still have very low fat soluble vitamins like vitamin A or vitamin E, then you definitely can lean in and say, yeah, we might have a suspected vitamin A or vitamin E problem here. So that's one of those really important cases of making sure that as producers, you have good conversations with your vet and think about what's the appropriate reference range to look at. Is this a newborn who never got a chance to suckle? Is this a newborn who didn't really go after it very much, so he might be really low anyway? Or is this one that, yep, he was fine for a few days, he definitely nursed, and now all of a sudden he's sick or has died on us? So yeah, I think the micronutrient deficiency might be one of the challenges that we'll see again coming into this winter. So what other things are you talking to producers about, Meg, as you say, okay, this might be year 2, 3, 4 of drought? Hay stocks are limited because the optimistic farmer decided to sell all of his hay last year to make some money. We don't blame him or her. What things need to be top of mind as we think about cow herd nutrition going into the winter?
Well, one of the big ones, at least I discuss with those producers, is body condition. Making sure those cows are in good condition coming into the winter months. We all know a lot of times the weather is not 100% predictable, and as we move into those winter months, we know, at least in our area, we're going to get to 20, 30 below. January, February timeframe. I'm sorry to those producers that are listening up here in Montana, but we always like to think it's going to be a better winter. But if you look at some of those long range forecasts, they're talking an extended winter period, cold, snowy, which honestly, we don't want, but we really need, just to help us recover more from the drought, or at least help get us maybe more towards the positive plane of precipitation for the year. So one of the big ones is obviously protein. during those winter months, especially for those cattle out on pasture. We try to extend the grazing season as long as we possibly can. And protein starts to get limited, even as early up here as, July, August, as those forages start to senesce out there. But right, she's getting close to weaning time. She's probably not nursing that calf so much. So those protein needs aren't as important at, during those fall months. But as we move into the cold, she's going to start to require a lot more protein, especially as we get closer to calving. Energy wise, if they're getting a good meal every day, they're full. Um, Energy needs are going to be pretty good and close to met, but we still want to see some better quality forages available. And I always, I try to break it down on a price per pound of nutrient basis for those cows. But one thing to also consider, you might find a really cheap supplement, but is it easy to feed? Can you get enough of it? What's that labor cost that gets it out there? So, a lot of times one of our cheapest supplements is that alfalfa, good quality alfalfa, or, grass alfalfa hay, or even just a good quality grass hay, just to help meet those protein needs out there. But one of the things we discuss, I mean, last year I was kind of surprised. We didn't see a lot of thin cows. I saw some thinner cows, that body condition score 3. um, Not as many as I saw in 2017 with our flash drought, which was just a one a year and done, where a lot of those cows were in poor condition that fall. And then we went into one of the worst winters in 100 years here. So that really played a huge detrimental role on that cow condition. So
What do you think were the differences as you consider what you saw producers doing in 2017 versus what they're doing now? Why do they seem to be better prepared?
I think that's it. I think some of them are just more better prepared for this type of drought, at least in the short term. If we consider, and unfortunately, we had COVID the last few years, but it also kind of coincided with one of those really horrible droughts. And it's been a prolonged drought, as we've seen also with COVID. It just kind of keeps lingering out there. And um, what I'm seeing is that some of those producers, at least that first year, kind of weathered the storm a little bit better. They started feeding a little bit early, versus in 2017, it was kind of more of an optimistic, like, oh, it'll be fine this winter. We'll get snow and everything will be good. I've got some hay. Um, and just wondering how those cows came through 2017, and those that are still in the herd, how maybe they have changed metabolically and biologically, especially during those calves that were born in the spring of 2018. And those heifers, are they still in the herd? And maybe they're able to weather the storm a little bit better, right? The environment does impact a lot of our um, production needs and our production from those cows in the subsequent years. So, be interesting to see if maybe some of those cows that are weathering a little better were from some of those harsher times when those nutrient supplies were limiting. And I also think, especially the fall, we didn't expect the drought in 2017. It came on pretty hard and fast, and um, snow, I believe, if I remember right, set in like the first weekend in October, and we didn't see it. Yeah, it cold and snowy that first weekend, and it did not end until, um, about March, April that following year. So, if they were already kind of behind, it was really difficult to get them to make up some of those nutrient imbalances. Whereas this year, at least the last few years, maybe a little bit more proactive in getting those nutrients out to those cows, whether it's a hay, or a lot of wheat mid pellets were fed, or alfalfa cubes were fed these last few years, just trying to get some extra nutrients out to those cows.
Yeah, I think this last spring was kind of long and cold for you guys up there too, right?
Yeah, we had 2 spring storms, kind of a week apart, and honestly, from the some of the producers I spoke to, they were so happy for the moisture. They were so willing to battle that moisture, even though it was right smack in the middle of calving season up here. And unfortunately, sometimes we have to pay that ultimate price. We lose some calves to illness, the cold, and things like that. But in regards, we also, at least in a lot of the areas of Montana, got some good pasture growth out of it. At least kind of in the southern part, I know I'll have some extension agents call and tell me about. how awful it still is up in the north central part and kind of west central Montana that they didn't receive any of that moisture. But fortunately for a lot of us, we did receive good moisture this spring and got some good pasture growth. We were able to turn those girls out onto some green grass this year.
Yeah, I was in Glacier National Park, which would be the northwest corner of Montana, for anybody who doesn't know. And I was there in first couple of weeks of July. And normally that road going to the Sun Road that goes through there is traditionally open by July 1st or July 4th at the latest. They've only ever had like 2 or 3 times. And one of them was like the war when they weren't open by like that time. And we were there on July 12th, and we got to ride our bikes up part of going to the Sun Road because it was still closed to traffic. Because on July 1st, they had a 40-foot snowdrift to still push through. So they opened the road on July 13th. That actually ended up being a pretty cool experience because not very many people hit that really narrow window between when they let the cars in and things like that. So that was cool, but I definitely felt for your producers and how cold and long that spring had been if that snow was still that high at that time.
I guess it was needed, so we didn't complain too much, but definitely, we lost some calves in those storms, and yeah, it's one of the fun things. I've only been up part of the going to the Sun Road because it was the other half was closed for construction here quite a while ago. So need to get back up there and experience that again, even though heights are not my thing, and always afraid I'm going to drive off the side of the road. So maybe have somebody else drive.
So I wanted to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, and this will be appropriate for producers to think about in the upcoming months. Uh, what do you talk to producers about for cold stress, or what kind of strategies do you see producers adopting to deal with cold stress? Which seems like it's only gotten worse, right? Like
Yeah.
it's bigger, it's more dramatic. It's 20 below for a week instead of 20 below for 24 hours.
hmm Yeah, that's the difficult question, as you know, Steph. The NRC hasn't updated their cold stress or their winter requirements, and since oh goodness, 1984 or I can't remember whichever 80s version of the nutrient requirements came out. So, that's 40 years. We don't like to think about that too much, but um and the general recommendation was just energy. You just need to increase your energy. Rule of thumb, 1% energy requirements for every degree below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, one of the things I guess that's nice about Montana is we do get those big temperature swings, and if those cows have time to adapt to our colder temperatures, which hopefully this fall they did. We had a nice fall, kind of got cold a little more gradually than some years. You know, Luckily, we haven't been daytime temp below 0 yet, but it's been close in some of our areas. But, those cows will adapt to some of our colder temperatures. They can develop that hair coat. So, that's one thing to consider in some of those requirements, and we know not just energy increases during the winter. So one of the big things, I guess, if we get to these cold snaps, for us, 20, 30 below, um, feeding maybe not your super high quality forage, like a really high quality alfalfa, that greater than 20% protein, feeding something in that grass hay range, even mixed with straw, trying to get that forage to sit in that rumen a little bit longer. Keep that rumen using that heat to that, because that's what the cows use to stay warm in the wintertime, is using that rumen heat and of fermentation there. Um, Also recommend, if you can feed maybe once or twice a day, or roll out some of that hay closer to evening time. I know it's hard when it gets dark at quarter after 4. I mean, we're getting towards 4 o'clock when it's starting to get dark now, and it gets a little bit more difficult to feed, but rolling it out so they can keep that fermentation going all night, especially on those really cold nights. But right now, we don't have a lot of wind, but that's our big factor, as well as is the wind out here. It could be 0 degrees during the day, but 20, 30 mile an hour wind really drops that temperature. So just some producers, they have some more enclosed areas, tree cover, things like that. Anywhere they can kind of huddle up and get out of the wind is kind of a big factor that I discuss with producers, is how can you get those cows to a better or more moderate energy demand, I guess, than being full out in the wind. And when it's cold out, you're going to see them hunkered down, not really wanting to go to feed very much. Um, and then when it gets nice out, the sun comes out and everything. They'll be out grazing, picking through some of that snow to get to the forage that's there. But one thing, if you go out and you see all that snow on the cow's back, if it's not melting, she's got a pretty good insulation going on there. So, and that's also where body condition comes in. The better body condition they're in, helps them weather that winter a little bit better too. Can help them withstand that storm, or two as those temps drop. And big one too, a question I get about in the wintertime is, well, can my cows only eat snow? Do I have to provide them a water source? And my answer is yes. You need to provide them some sort of water source to help maintain that feed intake. To keep them going. They can eat snow for a little while, just to kind of get them by, especially if it's, you got a big winter storm coming and things like that. They'll do their best they can, but definitely having an open water source so they can get a good fresh drink of water can really help keep them going as we move into those higher requirements pre-calving.
I think they've done some research up in Canada actually that suggests that cows can kind of meet their water requirements from snow. But I think your point really is if you want to keep up feed intake, they're going to need more than that, right? And so trying to get to that, yeah. So, and we always teach the students, right, in feedlot nutrition, right? It's like, oh, if there's a bunch of feed left in the bunk, first thing you check is the water. Is
Hmm.
the water froze or dirty or shocking them, or what's the issue, right? Because water intake drives feed intake. So, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think for a few days, as they weather a storm or something like that, they can definitely get by on just the snow that's on the ground. But I don't know about anybody else, but I don't, and if it's 30 below, I don't really want to go eat snow either as a water source. It works when we need it too, but definitely not something to solely rely on in the wintertime.
Yeah, especially since cows actually prefer slightly warmer water. If you give them the choice, they'd rather drink something that's warmer rather than cold.
Hmm.
Awesome. What other topics or things have you been working on out there, Meg, thinking about? Wanted to make sure that you could get that opportunity to share that with our producer audience.
That's a hard one. We always try to think what's going to be the next big thing.
Yeah, what's your
I
crystal
haven't
ball say?
Yeah, I haven't predicted it yet, so obviously I'm not a psychic or anything. Who would have predicted, 3 years ago we'd be going on this a year 3 of a drought in some of these areas, especially when just a few years ago the big topic was, gosh, we had so much rain, all my hay is moldy. What what do we do? Um, so that's kind of the, I guess, the game we play, or at least the strategy we have to come up with. Um, and what's going to be the next big thing. I hopefully next year it won't be drought anymore, and it'll just maybe go back to some cattle management, some strategic supplementation work and how to keep those cows out grazing for you, versus, well, we have no grass, what do we do now? And um, one of the big ones, I guess, I've been asked to cover several times is just some general record keeping. What records should producers be keeping? How best to keep those records, and as you know, there's several programs available that are internet based, or cell phone based, however you want to use it, that you can input all your records into. And obviously we can still use the pen and paper. It doesn't have to be extremely fancy or anything. I just like to see if you write it down, especially knowing which calves, which cow goes, or which calf goes to which cow. That can really help you make those decisions of which replacements to keep in the herd, how best to utilize some of those records as well. um, After calving, genetics wise, our seed stock guys, they're, or gals, they keep a lot of records. We have a grad student right now who's one of the bigger seed stock producers, and she's a grad student. And I've never seen somebody so organized with records before. And we went out and we're doing some work with her, and she had an Excel file open with, I don't know, 30 different columns of all the things that they measure, as well as a paper copy of everything that they were double cross checking and stuff. So you can be that intense, or, oh, I don't have, oh, here we go. this is obviously an old one, NCBA Red Book, you can keep records in there. Hopefully, don't lose it or anything. Keep that tucked in the pocket. But just keeping some general records so when it's time to make some of those decisions, you have a tool to use to make those. And I think that's the big thing too is management tools um, with that general record keeping and everything. That was kind of the surprise to me as well when I talk about it and there's still producers that don't preg check in the fall and just, you're carrying maybe some open cows over to the winter and especially these last few years it's very important to minimize those opens because they're just eating for you. They aren't really doing much for you production wise. And then I thought of another thing while I was saying that and now I don't remember what it was. So obviously it wasn't super important. Um, but body condition, do some workshops on that. Um, Otherwise, a lot of what my focus has been on is the drought, obviously, but also hopefully maybe get back into those supplementation strategies and how to more effectively use some of those supplements, commercial or otherwise, that are out there, and how best to use those for the cattle herd.
Yeah, absolutely. That fits a lot with what our research is here, right? On strategic supplementation of things like minerals and vitamins. On body condition score, I always, tell producers it's really hard to try to add body condition during the winter. That is the most expensive time to try to do that. So think about how you don't let her get into really poor shape at the end of summer and all of a sudden realize that you need to add a body condition score by the time she calves or breeds, or you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, definitely, and we're seeing quite a few thinner cows come through this year. You can only feed them so much, or whatever you have available. And if you don't have anything available, we've maybe managed those cows into a body condition score 3 or 4, hoping to tough them out a little bit. I suppose on one side you could say, well, they're weaning themselves out of the herd, but also is that the cow that you want weaned out of the herd, as based on some management issues there. So that's kind of the big discussion of when's too much of a body condition or when's too much and when's too little and how best we can get them moved forward into the next year because right calf a year is our goal and hopefully those cows are meeting that and um, then kind of on along those same lines doing a during drought doing an early preg check. We had a lot of producers doing a preg check 45-ish days after their breeding season end or they tightened up their breeding season in the last few years and only keeping some of those AI animals or something like that as well as then doing then another preg check prior to culling um, some of those open cows because sometimes you can if 45 days we're our veterinarians are doing a really good job but if we get earlier than that that gets a little bit to be a little bit more difficult in assessing pregnancy status, especially AI versus maybe some natural service depending on how long after AI you turned out those bulls. So doing some things like that. I'm not a reproductive physiologist, but I try to speak very generic about those things. So, just preg checking and things like that.
Yeah, I think there's some nice data out there, right, that say that, the cows that calve earlier are going to obviously produce the heaviest calves at weaning because those calves have been on the ground longer. They're more likely to have those cows breed back. If a calf is born early, a heifer is born early, she's more likely to calve again herself early in the season, right? So there's probably some hereditary fertility there. So yeah, I think that those things are all good comments.
Yep. Yeah, and the big question the last few years is keeping those heifer replacement. Do you keep heifer replacements because they're going to take more energy, some extra labor, extra feed, getting them ready to breed, or do you keep some of those older cows it's kind of one of those if she's 13 and made it through your herd and she's obviously paid for herself over and over again with that calf, maybe is it time for her to go down the road unless she's producing well for you still? So those are some decisions, you throw out there as generalities, and then the producer then has to make those difficult decisions. But one thing I always like to stress with our heifer replacements is not all heifers are destined to be replacement heifers in a breeding herd. Some of them are destined for the feedlot, and marketing early for those can really help the bottom line, as well as selling those cull cows in a timely manner before the flood of the market here is, and we've well, in Montana we've seen kind of a steady stream of cows coming through the last, throughout the year. um, However, as you preg check in the fall, those cull cows are going to come and flood through the market October, November, December. And is it a possibility of holding them over, maybe putting some extra weight on them? Or maybe they are late bred and you can sell them as such. But I think just different marketing streams too is something to look at as a cow calf producer, because you have, especially seed stock, obviously you're looking for your bull calves and maybe some of those heifers. But for those commercial guys, steer calves, getting the best price for them, looking at maybe some of those video auctions, and then those heifer calves, whether they're breeding or feedlot destined.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I think we'll go ahead and wrap up here with the last few questions that apparently are going to be a part of this podcast every time. So I don't know if you saw these or not, or this will be like the lightning round at the end of Brene Brown's podcast.
Okay.
So what is your favorite beef resource?
Oh, and actually, I read the question, but I meant to bring it out. I like the NRC, but I truly like to use the Oklahoma State Beef Handbook Guide. No offense to any other beef handbook guides out there. Um, just because everything I feel is more on layman's terms, and it's very easily conveyed to producers, and it's something that they can pick up and buy themselves um, for from Oklahoma State, and be able to look through it, and and really have those questions. And then I guess I have two. The other one is also the Iowa State brand software. I think it's very easy to use, very easily calculated for those cattle diets. So I know most of our extension agents up here use it as well, and I just think it's one of those really good resources that producers, extension agents, faculty, everybody can use. That's really helpful.
Nice. I didn't even have to pay you for that plug for the Iowa State software. So.
Dan did. Dan did.
Perfect. Perfect. He's hunting mule deer in western Nebraska this week, so he's not here. But Garland's down the hall who wrote the brand software. So yeah, no, I'm sure Dan is cold this week.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't know. I'm a fair weather everything anymore. So I don't think I want to be out hunting right now.
Yeah. Apparently he bought a really awesome teepee that has like some sort of fire thing or like heat source in the middle. So he was fully prepared for it to be cold. He said it was 7 degrees yesterday morning. So
Oh,
I'm sure
no.
he's fine.
He'll be fine. He'll be fine.
All right. Question number 2. What is a book not related to beef that you are currently reading?
Oh goodness. I'm almost finished with actually the new Janet Ivanovich book, Going Rogue. I enjoy the Stephanie Plum series, so always look forward to her. And then I kind of have about 8 books I'm in the middle of, but I'm also reading A.G. Riddle's Pandemic. It's a fiction book as well, but it's kind of interesting just based on the fact that we just went through a pandemic, and the responses, because he did actually go to like the World Health Organization and the CDC and learn like what their responses are to some of these global pandemics and everything. So it's a fictional read, but it's been kind of interesting as well on that regard.
Nice. Did you read his earlier ones? Was it like Atlantis or
Yes.
yeah, he had a whole series of ones that were kind of along that lines.
Yeah, no, and that's why I picked up this book. I think it's a first in 2 or 3 books or again, but yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed the Atlantis, whatever that
Yeah.
that series is called. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed those books, so that's why I picked this up. And yeah.
Nice. I thought that question is funny because I was thinking, when was the last time I read a book related to beef, right? Like other than like the NRC and things like that. I definitely am not sitting at home at night being like, what book can I flip through tonight that's about beef? Unless it's a cookbook. So
Yes, I definitely read those.
yes. All right. What is a trait of someone you know that has allowed them to be successful?
Oh wow, I didn't read that question.
Gonna make you think on your feet.
I know, and I would. I would have to say, just hard, one of the big things to be successful, isn't always the best education or anything. It's just being hardworking, willing to work for that goal. And I think I have several friends and colleagues that worked and strive for that hardworking, um, and trying to become a successful faculty member, staff, friend, whatever their career or personal goals are, is just working very hard at that and trying to better themselves, I think is the big thing.
Nice. I like it. Hard work and continuous improvement. That's what I heard there.
Yeah, that's then a lot more words, but yeah, that's a hard there's so many good traits, and
Yeah, that's good. We got lots of good people around us here in this industry, so that's
yes, we
good.
do. Yeah, it's amazing how small the industry is once you kinda get out there and realize, like, "Oh, I met them, and they know this," they know you or Dan or somebody, and it's kind of interesting to see how small the industry is.
Absolutely. It is definitely a small industry. Well, thanks, Meg, so much for your time today. This has been really great to get to have a chat with you, and hopefully, producers find a lot of value in our talk today.
Well, thank you for having me. This was very fun, and hopefully do it again in the future sometime.
Absolutely.